Hey, welcome back to Codetega. My name is LeVar, and today we're going to be building a desktop app using Electron and React. I'm also going to show you how to initialize Tailwind into your project so you can style your desktop app however you want. A couple things to note: you need to have some background in JavaScript, CSS, and HTML. You also have to have an environment set up on your computer. If you don't have an IDE, Node, and Node Package Manager installed, you can go ahead and follow my other tutorial on how to set that up before you begin. But if you have those things set up and you're ready to go, let's start. First things we need to do is open up a terminal in the project directory, the directory that you're going to be working in. So let me clear this out. I'm going to be working out of projects Electron. And then we're going to need to install and initialize our Electron app. You can name your project whatever you want. For this tutorial, I'm going to name mine Codetega Electron. But for this tutorial, you'll be naming it whatever you want to name it. And in order for us to use React with Electron, we need to ensure that we have the Webpack template. If you leave this piece off the install, you won't be able to follow along with this tutorial. And so ensure that you have the Webpack template tag at the end of your npm install. Now it might take a few minutes for this to install for you. Usually takes me about 2 to 3 minutes to install. But yeah, I can't stress it enough, because you can install Electron without this template and it would install a version of Electron for your desktop apps. But in order for us to integrate React, we need that template. Next, you want to CD into that new project that you just created. So CD into it, and you should be working out of that project directory for the rest of the time. As you can see here in the project directory, it's set up very similar to a React app with a source folder, and that's the folder that we generally work out of, along with some Webpack JavaScript files that come bundled with that Webpack template. Now we want to install a few of our libraries that we're going to need for this. Babel preset React, which includes some plugins to run, JSX code. Babel loader, and this package will allow transpiling of JavaScript files using Babel and Webpack. And then Babel core used to come standard with Electron. I don't think it does anymore, or with the Webpack bundle. So we just want to make sure that's installed, because that's going to be our compiler. Once you've installed those things, just clear my terminal real quick. You want to open up your Webpack rules.js. You can see an example here of a Webpack loader rule in this array. But what we want to do is install something similar. And instead of using the TS loader, we're going to be using the Babel loader. And it should look something like this. This is a rule configuration for Webpack, specifically for handling JavaScript and JSX files. The property is a regular JSX expression. That question mark at the end is just so that it can match both JS and JSX files. The use is we're going to be using Babel loader for Webpack. That allows you to use Babel to transpile your JavaScript files. And then your option is we're going to be using that preset React option that we installed earlier. We want to make sure we exclude node modules, and because this is typically done to improve your build performance. And since the dependencies of node modules are already set in the format and doesn't need to be transpiled. So let's go ahead, and if you haven't, make sure you've added that and saved it to your Webpack rules. Next, we want to install our React libraries. So go back to your terminal and install React and React DOM. We install React to define the structure and behavior of our application's UI, and then React DOM. Even though Electron uses a version of Chromium to render content, we still need React DOM to render your React components into the DOM. Now, similar to a React app, we need an index file. So go ahead and create an index.jsx file. And I'll import this here. So it should look something like this. It's a little bit different than what you might see on a standard React app, but it also probably looks very familiar to you. The code in your index file sets up the initial rendering for your React application in an Electron environment. It imports React and the create root function from the React DOM client, which creates a root to the document body, and it renders a simple hello world. Now that we have our root file, we need to update our renderer.js file. So go into your renderer.js file. Should look something like this. And down here at the bottom, instead of importing index.css, we want to import that JSX file that we just created. Now, like a React app, we want to create our app.jsx file. So create your app.jsx file. One thing to note here, first let's just create that. Should be like an export default function app, similar to what we would have in a React app. One thing to note here is that when importing components in our Electron app, we actually need to show the extension along with it. So here in our index file, we want to run our app component instead of our hello world dev element. So let's import the app element. And you'll notice on my auto import that it didn't import the extension. So if we were to try to turn this on and run it, npm start down here in the terminal, we should see an error code. And I'll show you what that looks like just in case you run into this in the future and you forget to add that extension. But if you start an app or your React app without that JSX extension on the import, unlike you would in React, it's actually going to break your code. It needs specific extension requirements. Now, as we are launching our dev servers on the renderer process, this is where we should see the error. Boom, we have an error, and this is what it should look like if we don't add that extension on the end of our import statement. So go ahead and add that, and let's just check it out again and see if it works by running. Let's clear that out, and then we'll run an npm start. And this time when it compiles and builds, we should not run into any issues or errors. It'll run through its checks and generate our rendering process. And here you go. Our Electron app just opened, and we have our app up and running. As you can see, it's rendering to our app file. It says app. If we were to change this to testing, it should compile and update it to testing just like it would in a React element when you're testing locally on your port 3000. So let's go ahead and close this. I don't want this open right now quite yet. Let's clear my terminal. All right. So now we know we've done everything right up to this point if your Electron app started. If it didn't, go back through the tutorial and see if you missed something. Now we have a desktop app, and as we look around, we're going to notice a few things. So actually, let me open this back up. Couple things to note that are standard. So when your app actually opens, you can see here that we have this menu that's preloaded with an Electron app, and also over here we have our dev tools opened up where we can see our console sources and network. For a user of our app, we don't want this to open up. And for me, I prefer to use like a browser router than using this menu up here. So I want to get rid of this menu, and I also want to get rid of this opening automatically. When I'm developing, it's fine. It actually is super helpful, so you want to turn it on while developing. But for live production, you don't want this opening for your users. So let's go ahead and close it out. And what we want to do is we want to open, see, where is that? That's in our main.js file. So go into your main.js file, and down here, we see this open the DevTools tag for the main window. We just want to comment that out. When we're developing, we'll uncomment it out. But when in production mode, we don't want that DevTools to open up. And then the next thing we need to do is down here in our create window function, one of the object arguments is we want to auto hide menu bar, and we want to set that to true. Once we do that and we start our Electron app, we should see that it doesn't open up our dev tools, and that menu should be gone. Boom, there we have it. Our desktop app is created, and we can now begin to create an application just like we would in React, but for the desktop. This makes it easy to create cross-platform applications for both web-based and desktop-based software, similar to how maybe Slack does it. Slack's the only one I can think of off the top of my head, but there are a lot of software, a lot of new software that's come out that's both web-based and PC-based, so that makes it nice. But we now have a desktop application. All right, now to the part where everyone asked me about in one of my last videos on how to initialize Tailwind into our desktop app. First, we want to make sure that we open up a terminal. And then we need to install the necessary libraries. Tailwind is a necessary library because that's going to be our styling library that we use. PostLoader is going to integrate our process into our Webpack build and apply transformation as part of the build pipeline. And then Auto Prefixer is a post CSS plugin that will basically vendor prefixes to your CSS rules, and it ensures compatibility among different browsers. And then some of you have probably used Post CSS before, and it's a tool for transforming CSS with JavaScript plugins. And it's the core tool that Post CSS Loader and plugins like Auto Prefixer are going to use in this process. So make sure you install and save those as dev dependencies, just like with the save dev here. And then once that's done, we can start on our next part. We want to initialize Tailwind. If you've used Tailwind before, you're familiar with this process, but it's going to be an NPX, not an NPM. So it's an NPX Tailwind CSS init, which is going to initialize our Tailwind and create a Tailwind config folder for our project. So we now have a Tailwind config folder because we've initialized it. There are a couple plugins. There are basically 3 libraries that are generally used in Tailwind, and they're common. I'm going to install them as they are more often used than they're not. So if you're familiar with these libraries, you can go ahead and choose whether or not you install them or not, but I'm going to install them, and that's Tailwind, Forms, Typography, and Aspect Ratio. So these libraries right here. Now we want to set up our Tailwind inside of our project. You can go ahead and minimize your terminal if it's in the way. We'll start here with, let's close out these files. And we'll start in our renderer. Let's go renderer config. So it should be our webpack renderer config file. Now notice we have these this use object. What we want to do is we want to add one more object here inside this array. Whoops, hide that so you can see. So it should come with CSS loader and style loader, but we want to add this post CSS loader. It's going to load our CSS, and it's going to require our Tailwind CSS and our auto prefixer. Once you've done that in your webpack renderer config file, we want to open up our webpack rules.js file. So that would be right here. And below that JSX file that we created, we're going to add one more object. And so it's going to look like this, and it's going to be a use case for our app source CSS loader and post CSS loader. So it looks similar to the one we created before, but it's for CSS instead of JSX. Now that we've done that, notice here that in the include file, we're using a path.resolve. So you want to make sure that you require path and set it to the variable at the very top, path1, set it to the value of path, so that we can access that path library and resolve it into our directory name. Now we do what we would normally do in a Tailwind React app, and that's in the content. We want to require the template files that are going to be accessing the CSS, and then the required plugins that we want to use. And so if you've installed those plugins that we installed for Tailwind, you can go ahead and import them here in the plugins. If you didn't install them, don't add them, otherwise it will cause an error because it will look for these libraries and not exist. So if you installed them, just go ahead and add them there if you want. Now we just go into our index.css file, and we want to update that to pull our Tailwind CSS libraries with base components and utilities. And then finally, we just need to import that and make sure it's imported into our index file. So go ahead and import index.css. And now we should have access to Tailwind across our application. So let's open up our app file. And we have testing. Let's go class name, font bold, and text white. And then I'll wrap this in a div. And we'll just make this a black background by going min height, screen, max height, full. And we'll set the background to Zinc 950. So let's just test it out by opening up a terminal and running npm start and let our app compile and build. And what we should see is if we did everything right, we should see the styling with a black background and white lettering on our application. Might take a second. Boom, here we go. Hopefully this is working correctly for you on your end as well, and if you have any questions or comments, please let me know below and I'll do my best to respond to them. But for now, this is a React Electron desktop application that utilizes Tailwind for its styling. And now you can do whatever you would do in a React app. You can wrap your app around a browser router if you want and create a route functionality, create different components, different pages, but now it'll function just like it would any other React app. If there's a demo that you want to see that is related to this or a demo that's not related to this, please let me know in the comments below. I really appreciate you watching and following along. If you haven't already, please click subscribe to my channel. It would help me out a ton. I would really appreciate it. And if there's anything you want to see or any questions about this tutorial, let me know. I appreciate it. Thanks for watching Code Taiga, and I'll catch you around.